Today's program on Inside OPRF Museum is very special because we have a very special guest. So I am going to turn the screen over to David Sokol, who is a legendary figure in Oak Park, and your tenure as a villager here has been 50 years, if I may say so, and you've held many different official and elected positions. You're also Professor Emeritus of the Art History Department at UIC. And you've written a couple of books, especially about Oak Park history as well. So we're very glad to have your expertise here today talking about parades. So with that, I will pass the microphone over to David Sokol.
Is this the way we're going to keep this on the side?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. The title I actually picked for this was Parades, Protests, and Pickets. I had done a couple-minute thing for the village a few years ago for its YouTube kind of presentations on parades, which were all celebratory. But this time, we're not doing it all just celebratory. It's a much more complex thing. And I thought particularly people who are interested in local history might be interested more in the nuanced nature of the way people gathered in terms of being opposed to or supporting things. So I sort of start us off that way. It is a very old saying that everyone loves a parade. They are found in many countries, going back to ancient times when heroes and conquering armies marched into their home cities with their captured loot, and the populace stood on the sidelines, cheering and welcoming them. And while many parades continue to celebrate military victories and civic anniversaries in the early years of the young country, others, particularly on and about holidays, quickly came into being. The communities of Oak Park and River Forest were neither different nor unusual in holding parades on similar occasions, though we have little knowledge of the early years in River Forest. Interestingly, as that village was incorporated in 1880, 20 years earlier than Oak Park, we might find that surprising, but the size is an issue. The River Forest only had a population of about 1,000 people in 1880, whereas Oak Park had almost 10,000 people of population when it separated from Cicero Township in 1900, 1901. So, and partially as a result of that history and the comparative sizes, the vast majority of what we're going to be seeing today is about these parades and protests and so forth in Oak Park. There are just very few visual records or stories in the local newspapers about them. As the success and the quick acceptance of the automobile came about the same time as Oak Park was sort of founded and was having an impact, parades were certainly one of the public events that were quick to incorporate those automobiles. Indeed, by the time of the Memorial Day Parade in 1917, the spokesperson for the DAR, who was primarily responsible for the parade, announced that automobiles would be provided for the veterans who participated in the parade rather than having them march. Some of the parades were annual, and some were scheduled with great regularity. Others were celebratory for a specific occasion, and still others had short runs and then disappeared. In addition to those that were joyous celebrations, there were others that we might more readily consider protest marches, but both types had a combination of people both in the parade and among the onlookers. The most frequent parades in the early years and for a long time afterwards were those on Memorial Day, the 4th of July, and Labor Day. And we'll look later on, return to see more about them. Among the occasional or irregularly scheduled parades were those for Christmas, St. Patrick's Day, and Halloween. There were a lot of latitude in how the Halloween and Christmas parades were run, even in the dates in which they did occur. In 1938, for example, a pre-Christmas parade included both Santa Claus and various unrelated Storyland characters. The parade ended at Forest and Lake Street, where Santa receives his young guests in a log cabin. And here we see one of those parades. And 2 years earlier, in 1936, Santa had arrived in Oak Park on the Santa Fe Railroad City of Denver. To accommodate the expected crowds, North Boulevard was blocked off between Forest and Marion Streets, and the village president of the time, Jimmy Howe, and the president of the Chamber of Commerce were prepared to give their speeches, but they were drowned out by the yells and roar of the crowd, and Santa left the train and was pulled through the business district on a sleigh. And here we see that occurrence happening with various representatives of public affairs, police, fire, and so forth.
And a couple of clowns. I promised the people some clowns as well.
Oops, let me go back.
That's fine.
I'm
We'll see
jumping
plenty
ahead a
more.
minute.
See plenty more.
Oak Park merchants, never missing the chance to draw attention to the forthcoming holiday and to the business district, even organized a pre-Christmas holiday walk on the day after Thanksgiving in 1996. In the 1940s, there was usually a Halloween parade through South Oak Park's business district and ending at South, later Ream Park. And here we have a photo that includes Susan Helfer near her birth home in 1946. She later went on to be an elected Oak Park Village trustee in the 1980s. A more recent and smaller Halloween parade was held at By School in 1971. And there was one in Oak Park, on Oak Park Avenue in 2013, which had including some out-of-town guests in these marvelous cupcake creations, for want of a better word. And so we see that, and of course the Halloween parades were much more open to humor than many of the others. Other irregularly scheduled parades included St. Patrick's Day. Though citizens from both villages were known to march in the Chicago parade, as in 2002, River Forest seems to have taken the lead in celebrating this holiday, and it was enjoyed this way in 1990, and where we see the fire trucks, police trucks, and so forth. Also, another view, we have political figures being represented as being driven along in convertibles, and in so many of the other parades, convertibles, automobiles became a very useful tool in the way of getting people to be able to strut their stuff. And another figure that just was very appealing here from the 1990 parade again. There was also news that we just don't seem to have a photo of about Oak Parkers marching in the St. Patrick's Day parade in Chicago. And so here's just a little headlines from the Pioneer Press newspaper about that. Probably, excuse me, among the scattered instances of participation, such as the ones we mentioned, we also have the participation, oops, I'm sorry, before I forgot this. There are occasional other parades. Some of the more unusual ones included that occurred for more than 1 year or more include this doll Puggy Parade from the early 1940s, which gave young girls a chance to show off their artistic flair in the way they decorated the buggies that held their dolls, and they all hoped to win a prize for their creativity. Though looking at this image, it must seem like some of them might have been coerced to participate by their parents, because the range of emotions on the faces range from joy to like, what am I doing here? And I think you get a kick out of seeing that. Among the scattered instances, like the participation of Oak Park in the participation in the Chicago annual St. Patrick's Day Parade already mentioned, there was the participation of the Oak Park Area Lesbian and Gay Association in a 1998 Chicago Gay Pride Parade. And we see some people from the organization here. Also, Opelka appeared in the parade also quite a few years later on a substantial float. In this case, you notice showing Oak Park and Berwyn as the creators of this particular float. Probably the major example of this kind of participation was the creation of a substantial float created by the Oak Park Park District to be in a parade and find a place at the Great Century of Progress Fair in Chicago in 1933. Unfortunately, we do not have a photograph of that that was able to be included, but we have substantial written documentation about it. Some of these parades were celebrations of anniversaries, like Oak Park's Golden Jubilee Parade in 1951. And we can see in this trolley being pulled along in the parade, an old-fashioned trolley car that probably would have had horses, some perhaps recognizable people to the oldest among us, people who then participated. However, the more recent one with people that you're more likely to recognize was the Centennial Parade in 2001, in which on the left you notice the late village president Joanne Trapani and the late Jenny Casson sort of leading the parade, although various others, I believe this is former President Osborne, former trustee, I came up with his name before and I'm forgetting it, and former late trustee as well. So we have various people participating in that parade, and a lot of elected officials came out, not only representing the village, but some of the other taxing bodies as well. There were also in the 1980s several just Oak Park parades, which were just celebrating of the community. And we see such as one in this 1984 Oak Park Parade, being primarily sponsored here by the Oak Leaves. And we see a variety of figures representing themselves and some historical ones as well. In one of those, we see various well-known figures. Our local Jim Tenuta, the Kinky the Clown, late Senate President Phil Rock, a longtime senator from Oak Park, being included in these. Among more recently, there was a special parade in honor of Miss Illinois later Miss America for 1990, Judith Vincent. And she occupied a float along Lake Street with various people, again, watching along the sides. And here we see her wearing her crown. Among the one-time parades, some were, well, some were not one time, but there are a couple of times. The running of the bulls had a brief run, pardon the expression, in honor of native son Ernest Hemingway. It was a mock running of the bulls with homemade bulls, such as you see here, running down Lake Street. And a bit of nostalgia looking at the names of some of the long since gone businesses that we see along here. Among the one-time parades, some were organized as protests or in reaction to events that were less than joyous. The March of the American Nazi Party in Oak Park in 1980 was a test. Why it's not turning? What? Okay. Go
There we
back.
go.
Okay, I'm sorry. The march was a test of the community's commitment to free speech, no matter how much the message was despised. And the march was greeted with signs carried by various organizations that opposed the Nazi ideology. And just on a personal note, I happen to have been on the village board as an elected trustee at that time. And we had very little discussion about the parade. We deferred to village president McClure telling them when they asked to have a parade that we hated and resented everything they stood for, but that was the price of free speech. They had their parade, and then there was a protest marches along the outside of the park and people showing their antipathy towards the ideology being expressed. 2 years later, the cheese seller, later J. Winberry, was picketed by citizens who opposed the parent company Nestle for their marketing of infant formula to poor mothers in Africa, where the formula might be readily mixed with contaminated water. So we see protest signs, and we see people actually marching along and picketing. Those of you could see it. I think this is long retired Barbara Ballinger, our head librarian, on the right, looking at one of the flyers that she and others were handing out. Even more political protest marches took place through the years, like this 1991, replete with many signs, protesting Clarence Thomas's appointment to the Supreme Court and in favor of women's rights to personal choice in reproduction. And we see it marching along in front of Unity Temple. Police presence was always there, but these were almost always peaceful parades. Similarly, the year before, in 1990, both marched and staying apart were representatives of the United Farm Workers and the national boycott of California grapes grown under horrible conditions. And we see that in front of the parking lot, the former Dominic's, now Pete's. And here are representatives, some stationary and others marched along. The Memorial Day parades had long histories in both communities, especially after the automobile made participation easier for old timers, as we mentioned. But perhaps, excuse me, because of the unpopularity of the wars after World War II, they had a mixed history and level of participation. Excuse me a second. At first, it was the student groups asking to be excused from participating, But by 1990, a lack of interest caused Oak Park to cancel its parade and limited its observation to a program at the Peace Triumphant Monument in Scoville Park, which has gone on ever since. However, River Forest continues to host a Memorial Day parade through the, excuse me, though the 90th annual parade was canceled in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. The 2011 parade, oops, here's one, the 1988, moving quite along, and we can see people of all ages participating in this event. And one other one in which we actually see the high school marching band moving along through that parade as well. So there continues to be a strong presence in recent years, COVID aside, in River Forest, with some participation from Oak Park and certainly a lot of Oak Parkers going off to see the parades. Recognizing that I have omitted some parades that had shorter lives and mattered more to one community than another, and also recognizing there have been long celebrations for Veterans Day at the Peace Memorial, replacing the increasingly infrequent traditional parade, we have a show of 1927 Armistice Parade as pre-Veterans Day title. This parade did double duty, also serving as the 25th anniversary of Oak Park as a separate village. There were local parades at the 4 municipal playgrounds, and children carried banners representing various municipal departments. This float that you're seeing here for one of about Oak Park's playgrounds was one of the 30 floats that participated in this major parade. Now we can at long last turn to the long-running and popular parades associated with the 4th of July and the more recent but continuing Multicultural Parade. Here, the 2016 Multicultural Parade, particularly like this image because it has not only people of different racial and ethnic identities, but age groups as well, from young children up to quite matures at the front, some of our local musicians. And they have been an important event. After Oak Park, District 97 set up the Cultural Center with Dolores Register, who recently passed away, as its first coordinator, supporting its commitment to educating about and celebrating the diversity of the community. One of the key elements of the program became these multicultural parades, with students of the 2 middle schools often having a leading role. The 2019 parade was the 39th annual event, and they typically, again, included people of all races, ages, and background. We conclude this brief examination of the parades and protests with the most enduring, best attended, and most popular of all, the parades celebrating the 4th of July. The parades on the 4th have been among those observed for the longest time in the villages, often accompanied by picnics and other outdoor events within and around the community. The one in Oak Park has a long history and usually incorporates groups of scouts, representatives of political parties, school bands, representatives of various local taxing bodies, classic cars, and more. And the candy tossed to the children who line the route is much appreciated by those who try very hard to get some of it. And this is particularly joyous when the candy is being handed out, as we see here, by our own Peggy Tuxinko, and dressed as the Statue of Liberty, and presenting the candy, and children holding flags, and of course, what would it be without Uncle Sam? So we have so many more images we could have picked, but we thought this is a good representative. There are, I should say, both a very brief summation of parades that I did some years ago that you can find on the Oak Park webpage under the little YouTubes, and there's a longer video that Joe Kreml made about parades, which has some real footage, and you can hear the bands and so forth, also available on the Oak Park parade. So that's what I have to share with you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions. The first one I see is Alan Hofstadter asking, is the Multicultural Parade returning this year? And I have no idea, unfortunately.
Because that one is usually in June or something.
I don't remember.
Yeah, good question.
You probably can contact, District 97 to find out.
But I've heard inklings that the Memorial Day parade is returning in River Forest. And there may be more than inklings at this point, but if anybody else has heard more details about that, I would suggest being on the lookout for that to come back this year as well. Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to put those in the chat. Here we have a couple more minutes before we have to end our program. And as we do that, I want to thank you, David, very much for all of the research that you put into this and all of the great stories and images that you've been able to find for us today.
Oh, thank you for all your help. Couldn't have done it without you.
And just amazing to see what a community we have and what chances we've had put together to come together as a community and celebrate together all of the different events that we've had parades for, or the very important causes that we've come together for. So I think with that, I off camera here will say that on the screen you can see my email address if anybody has questions afterwards or any comments to share. Feel free to get in touch with me. Otherwise, I will call it a show for today. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you
My
all
pleasure.
for being here. And I'll see you next time.